Good evening, Barbara.
Hi.
Welcome to Evening Report.
Thank you.
So, can you tell us about the beginnings, when the idea for the book was conceived?
Well, I think I've been wanting to write a book for a very long time, but it's a peculiar thing when you're an adopted person is you don't feel like you have no story really, or the story that you do have isn't yours. So, excuse me. So you don't feel like you have a right to tell your own story.
So that is something that most people, nearly all people, never get to experience, isn't it?
Well, unless, identity isn't an issue unless you're denied it. When it is something that you grow up with, you never consider what it would be like to not have one, to come from, to live your life without a past, essentially.
Okay. So if we go back to the beginning, that moment when you decided, I need to put this down to the book, into a book, my life's experience. What was happening around you at that time that you decided to take that course, that journey?
Well, what happened was I had been trying for a very long time to get my files. Every adopted person has a stack of files that sit with Oranga Tamariki, with births, deaths and marriages, and with the Justice Department. There are sets of files. And we have no access to them. We're not allowed those files. They are severed for all time. And they hold all kinds of information about how and why you were adopted, what happened to you in the time from before you were born and after you were born, how the adoption was arranged. And I finally, I actually kept a log and I recorded a lot of my conversations with Oranga Tamariki, and after 70 interactions, I'd gotten nowhere. But I ended up figuring that there's no system, there's no like step-by-step way that you go to get these files. Every person has to negotiate it and navigate it as if no one's done it in 65 years.
So no framework that is written down, both officially and from the point of view of others' experiences.
No. And there's, over 100,000 people in New Zealand are adopted, and because of the way adoption works and the way it impacts families, birth families and adopting families, we say around 1 in 3 New Zealanders have a direct link to forced or stranger adoption in New Zealand.
Oh, that's high. Huge.
That's very high. And so I ended up going to court, and the problem is that most people only a handful of people have been successful. Hundreds and hundreds of people have tried to get their files. I've got minutes from judges who have denied people their rights that say things like, adoption is a contract to which the adopted person is not party. So you have no right to those files. And if a judge has come up with if you've made an application and you've said, I have a hereditary disease and I want to understand the links of it and it might be in my file, that's not a good enough reason.
And that's most important, surely. Yeah.
Mental health is not considered. Well, it's actually called special reasons, and it's a term that is only in relation to the Adoption Act, but it's not defined in law. It's up to each judge to make their own decision based on if your reason is special enough.
And obviously there's been case law over the years. What does that speak to on that point?
The case law says, well, it speaks to legal precedent. If one judge has said mental illness is not a good reason, any other person coming to the court with that as their reason is going to be denied. So case law says, as I've said, that we are not party to the contracts. You can think just about any reason that you could have to want your files, and they are not acceptable reasons. You could be, I've seen the minutes of cases like a mother who'd lost her child and she's got months to live and she wants to find her child before she dies.
Yeah.
Not a good enough reason.
Gee, that's absolutely tragic. So you found a way. Let's jump forward and then we can go back. You found a way of basically breaking through that official bureaucratic wall, that legal wall. What was that?
Well, what I did, because I was recording all the conversations, particularly with social workers at Oranga Tamariki, and they were particularly vicious and particularly moralistic and blocking. And the worst thing is, of course, when I was looking for my files, I was 58. I've got 5 daughters. I've got 6 grandchildren. Yeah. And I can be on the phone with a 22-year-old social worker graduate. He can see my files. He can look through, and I can't.
You can't. How does that make you feel?
Makes you feel like you have no agency, that you are, as you were, as I was as a baby, a commodity, something that's just shut up and you're adopted and it's got nothing to do with you. And your new family is your family. What went before is of no value.
So what was the breakthrough for you?
Breakthrough was because I was recording all the conversations, and I would, if something had happened on the phone, I would follow it up with an email to the social worker. So I kept very good records, and the social worker said in one of the calls that I was just looking not for my file, but for the trim number of the file. Even that wasn't allowed to me. But the social worker said I needed to provide ID to get the trim thing, which was just another smokescreen. I gave her the birth certificate, the second birth certificate that you get, post-adoption certificate. And she said, sorry, we can't take that as your ID because the date on your birth certificate, that's my official ID, doesn't match what's in the file.
Oh, man. And that was the first time you realised that was the case?
Yes. And so I'd followed up with her in writing and she came back to me in writing. So I had that. That
confirmation. You're able to then use that legally. How did that map out?
Well, I was, but I also had another document that had come to me at that time, which was the only kind of proof of life, if you like, which was a piece of paper from the Salvation Army at the hospital where I was born. That was like a discharge feeding. It was the recipe for my feeding. And the birth date was wrong on there as well. It was a month different as well. So I have three different potential birth dates.
Why did you ever get an explanation as to why that had occurred?
No.
Never?
No.
Was it incompetence,
really
or were they trying to find a way of making it difficult should in the case in the future someone would try to actually get through and find who you really were?
Yeah, there's many examples of that. Yeah. So I used that as
the latter.
Yes, yeah. of just trying to make things very difficult. Yeah. So I argued that it was a violation of basic human rights to not know when you were born.
Is this under the New Zealand Bill of Rights?
Yes, that was my argument. And it had never come before that particular argument, and I had the evidence. That argument had never come before the courts. So they had to release my files.
That was something new. This is case law, this is precedence. Yeah. So did you pick up that you were going to win that early on, or was it a challenge with many twists and turns?
Judge Kalenikos actually came back after the first one and said that he needed more reasons, preferably special ones.
And did they define what those special ones were?
It's not defined in law. It's up to each judge. There is no way. So you can't, it's set up to ensure that you can't get it right.
And you're flying blind in a sense, and with respect to that. So if there were breakthroughs, we'll talk about legislative reform in a little while, but if there were breakthroughs, one would expect that from what your experience, it underscores the fact that there needs to be a pathway for people who are seeking to discover what their identity is. And secondly, that there is this problem here where you're flying blind. You're an intelligent woman, you're strong in research. You won't take no for an answer when you know it's right. We know that of you. If you didn't have all of those three skills coming into alignment, you
Yeah.
probably wouldn't have achieved what you've sought out to achieve. So just on that, let's perhaps go back to the book. Now, as we're going through the book, the first thing that strikes one, I believe, is that how brave it is to lay one's life out on the pages for anybody and everybody to see.
Yeah, I hate that.
Yeah, and I can only imagine in part what that must have been like, particularly once it's down and there's that space between when it's finished and it's going to be out there before the public.
Yeah. It's it's that feeling everyone will know everything. And I did not want to tell my story. And I didn't even think I had a story to tell.
So on that, I presume that you did this and you detailed your life with all of the, everybody's lives has twists and turns, but this is a remarkable tale. It struck.
You live your life and it seems normal.
Yeah, I guess. But this is remarkable. So with this, the assumption on my part here is that you've used your life to illustrate what it is like to have been adopted out and to be denied access to your identity.
Yes.
The purpose is very clear.
Yes.
Is that correct? So let's go back to what it was like. What were your earliest memories of being Barbara?
Well, it's funny that you even say that, because Barbara is not the name my mother gave me. Barbara is the name that the people who adopted me gave me. And even when I hear it come out of you now, 60 years later, it's uncomfortable for me. I don't like it.
It's different. I understand from reading the book that your youngest daughter is named after yourself, of whom your mother named you.
Yeah, exactly. There's a chapter in the book called How Many Times Can You Change Your Name? And so there's this disconnect, I guess, a disassociation with who you are. And there's certain behaviors that you learn. There's that understanding that there's a primal wound, that you cannot remove a baby from her mother, and because that child is pre-verbal, just think that there's no ill effect. But we do think that, and we still think that. We still think that there is no harm done by, that the first 3-4 months of life are an extension of pregnancy. You are in this deep communication. The only person in the world you know is your mother. And if you come out of that cocoon of the womb and you're removed from your mother, as I was directly, and hidden in another part of the hospital and prepared for adoption, you close down and you emotionally, and then, they say you go one of two ways. You either challenge everything from a very early age, or you become incredibly compliant. And I was the compliant one. I was this very good compliant child. And I remember clearly, I was terrified that if I said or did the wrong thing, I would be rejected. Now, that wasn't a conscious thought. It was just, that was what I knew to be true.
There's a part in the book, I'll just bring up on screen here, and it's really early in. This is chapter 2, and page 20. And you're talking about, was there another phone call, or did I dream my mother's voice? And you're speaking to that. That stood out to me very, very clearly about these two worlds that you're describing there. I was just wanting to ask you about that part of growing up. Was that early as well as going into your early adulthood, where it felt like you had, one foot in this world of which, you're living in, but there was a parallel as well of which you were missing out on? And I guess that leads into, asking you this part where you imagine what it would be like only if.
Yeah. You spend all your time imagining that. You have all kinds of fantasies, and I think I talk about that somewhere else, all the various things I thought my mother would be.
Yes.
But I can read you that little piece around that,
That'd be
if you like.
wonderful if you could, yes.
So it's talking about having this call with my mother, and I say, did I miss her call? My desire was so encompassing, I would have believed anything, even my own fantasies. I'd heard her voice for 9 months, her heartbeat, the rush of her blood, and the click of her bones. A mother possesses you within herself, and you are secure there. You make a snug cavern of her body, a nest or a burrow, and it is all yours. And then I go on about what is shared between mother and child. And you never lose that feeling. You never lose that feeling that you are connected somewhere. And I also think that while the adopting parent that you get, the adopting mother, is not the mother that you are expecting, you're also not the child that she was expecting, because you're not the child that she would have had she been able to have children. If the reason, and there are only two reasons really, I think, that people adopt. So one of them is infertility. And so you're not the child she would have had, you're a child. And that's a profound difference.
How do you respond to that as a young person?
Which part of young? I mean, at one point I was quite crazy and wild because, I went from being the very good child to being the very bad young woman, teenager. And then I kind of got very frightened and I went into a very cloistered marriage very early as a way of basically saving my life.
Yeah. And I guess through those chapters, a reader who hasn't had the privilege of meeting you would really begin to understand the cause and effect elements here. And I guess that also a lot, without giving too much away in the book, because it's a journey that people should experience for themselves. There are moments in the book that I thought, in some ways it's like if it was a piece of fiction, you'd think, that's magic. That is just wonderful. And those are elements of serendipity, if you like. Particularly where it came to, your journey and your reality around your mother and how you discovered parts of what was really your history, where your mother had reached out to try and find you, unbeknown to you in the physical world. But there was elements of serendipity on your journey to get to know her that was like, I guess the questions are, is that coincidence, or is this tied into that being a mother and that special bond that one has with the child?
I don't know if I can answer that. I mean, I do know that I have that I'm very conscious of each of my children, where they're at, time and space in the world. I mean, my oldest daughter's 40, so we're not talking children. And yet you never lose that. I'm always aware of them. And I guess I was always aware of my mother, and I think she was always aware of me. I don't...
There's in the book I picked up that there was some science that you cited that may give part explanation to it. But it's still a wonderment, isn't it? There's a mystery around it. But those realities of some of those special moments that kind of intersected in your journey, they stood out. And brave to put those down. I thought it brave... Sorry, it's me being a reader here. I was so excited by the book in some ways and enjoying the way you approached it, that it was as brave putting that out in some ways as what it was expressing some of your experiences of when things are very tough.
Yeah, I mean, the thing that's been most interesting now that the book is out and, people have been reading it and I've been getting a lot of response, is that while my external experiences are mine, and all adopted people grow up in families as diverse as non-adopted people, but the internal experience is very similar. And not for all adopted people, but most. I mean, I've had one or two, I must say men, but one or two people who have said, no, I don't feel any of that. It's no different for me. But, well, one. But in general, people are, there's a similarity.
So with all of this, if we just now turn to some of the solutions of putting things right, perhaps
Well,
I should just mention that journey that you took people on in the book before. Like, we're not leaving the book behind here, but that was very special. It does lead one into a continuum of thinking it needs to be put right, and I guess that's what we're doing. We're not just talking activism here, we're not talking crusades. This is about something that's very important to, as you outlaid at the beginning of this talk, that there are so many thousands of New Zealanders that are in a situation where they can't find their identity. So with this whole thing of the legal constraints of a law that came into place 65 years ago, it's almost as if it stops one by degrees of realising your true self. Is that a correct way of...
no, absolutely. What it does is it casts adopted people as a special class of persons.
And illegitimate was one of the terms that was stamped, wasn't it, on one of your files?
Originally, yes, and my very first supposed original birth certificate, because of course we have the Adult Adoption Information Act of 1985, and that was touted as being an answer to people's desire to have that information. In fact, it was a piece of gaslighting, I guess, because it gives you a birth certificate that has your mother's name on it, your birth name, and even if your father's name is in the file, that's not on there. There's no other information. But also stamped on that birth certificate is your adopters' names, their addresses, their occupations, and your new name. And when I spoke to births, deaths, and marriages about this, they said in writing to me that the original birth certificate is essentially ornamental, and the birth certificate that you are given after adoption, which names your adopters as birth parents, is called a legal fiction.
Wow.
So somewhere between essentially ornamental and legal fiction is where adopted people fall. So we have no real identity at all.
So, you know, when you made your breakthroughs, sorry, I'm jumbling around a little bit here, but when you made the breakthroughs, did you get a sense, maybe cliched to put it this way, and it's certainly two-dimensional, but that your identity was being constructed through your discovery, piece by piece, like a jigsaw?
Yes, it was.
And what was that transition like to the point where, or put it another way, at what point did you feel your identity was connected to your awareness of self?
It was not so much that there was now, once I had my files, that there was this stack of facts. It was that I had the files, that here was me before the adoption, that I did exist before the adoption. And, and the adoption didn't take place until I was 16 months old, something like that, 14 months old.
Legally,
So,
you mean? There's the
legally,
stamp on the paper.
yeah. So prior to that, there's all this time. First of all, there's the time from birth to being uplifted, and then there's the rest of the time. And I had another identity, and it gave me not so much the facts, although they were fascinating. It gave me a sense that I had a right to tell a story. It gave me legitimacy. That's what it is.
Did it bring the two parallel worlds of you together?
It did. It did.
Okay.
It was the opposite of illegitimacy.
That's really important. Yeah.
The law is the last moral law that we have in New Zealand, and it's, while you don't have the word illegitimate stamped on your original birth certificate now, the law still treats us as if we were illegitimate.
Yeah. Okay. So if we were going forward now, one gets a sense that legislative reform is coming. It's a matter of when. And everybody has been waiting for so long.
Mm-hmm.
The Law Commission's advisories, its report into an advisory of what the new law should look like.
In 2000.
Yeah, 1999, and then tabled in 2000, if I understand it correctly. Many people have kind of put it there, but the priority settings of policy and policy reform, the legislative agenda, seems to have placed it down the ladder. One would hope, perhaps, that it is a priority in a new term of government, but there's a lot of work, obviously, for people to do in that respect yet, as far as making sure it's got priority, a bit of air underneath it. I guess so I was laying down the foundation there, is what would be the ideal? I'm not talking about the legal framework and the structure of it. I'm talking about the spirit of the law. What would be the ideal in your mind that would come out of this, that would start to put it right for other people that are seeking to discover who they are?
I think a good place to start would be Julia Gillard's apology that she gave during her term, which was a very comprehensive apology to people who were adopted and their mothers who had their children taken. I mean, most women all the women that I know who are mothers of loss, as they call themselves, talk about, they did not give up their babies. They were removed from them. It was a systemic and systematic process that privileged one woman, provided a child to one woman who was childless, and in doing so, making another woman childless. And it was always from single mothers to mothers who had resources, husbands and church going. And I mean, my adopters are called in my file, an attractive, good married couple. These are, these terms are very, descriptive of the moral time. So what would be required is for a start to acknowledge that we are a stolen generation, that a great wrong was done to our mothers and to us, and it was compounded. It's one thing to be taken from your mother and given to another family, but to be denied that, to be told over and over again that you must be grateful, that you're lucky, that that a very good thing has happened to you, and for all of society to believe that, so that while you are silently suffering and aware that this is just not true, that you are living a lie. So to acknowledge that is going to change a lot of people. But it goes beyond that, because that idea that we are able to that idea is still enshrined in law. So it sits as a spirit in society, that it's okay to take children from mothers, that it's okay to not value motherhood, to put a figure on what's an acceptable amount that a mother must have, all those things. So we really need to alter the law as it stands, treats women and their children as commodities.
So listening to that, would it be correct to put it this way as well, that it requires a complete new rewiring? It needs rejuxtapositioning so that the children and those who are adults who were adopted out are at the forefront of it with the rights and have the right to access.
Absolutely. One judge, I think it might have been Judge Alice, I'm not sure now, I can't remember, in a minute said that, in one of his minutes denying a woman her files, said that adopted people had no right to their files, and he said he described us as adopted children of any age. So you get that extreme sense of infantilizing, and that's the same sense that I got when I was having to deal with a 22-year-old social work graduate who can look through my files, and people at births, deaths, and marriages can look through my files. Justice Department can look through my files.
They're your files.
And my files.
They're your files, your life, your identity.
My life. But no, it's not considered. But that's the point.
With details of your mother.
It's not my life.
Yeah.
My life is gone. My life is legally the life that is then given to me.
So
the
in some
identity
ways
that's given to me.
it was over before it started in some ways legally, from the point of view of,
Oh, yes. So, I mean, any siblings I might have had or would have in the future, uncles, aunts, grandfathers, ancestry, history, all of that is gone. None of that exists. It's like you spend your life in a witness protection program.
yeah. On that point, let's just close on something that I think is quite remarkable, and that we go back on to your page here. If people want to buy this book, they can do so, as you say, at very good bookstores around New Zealand. But you can either Google Tree of Strangers, or you can go to barbarasumner.nz, and you'll see all the different ways that you can buy it. It's a fantastic book, I've got to say, in many respects. It's one where I think has got to be right up there with the book of the last 10 years. It's just something else. So congratulations, Barbara.
Thank you.
And it would be wonderful to actually see this actually take form, and that things are put right after all of these years.
Yeah.
So on that point, let's wrap it up. Take care, and thanks for your time this evening.
Thank you.
Take care.
Thank you.
Bye-bye.